What if you started smoking, not because you wanted to, but because one man decided you should feel free doing it? In the 1920s, a single man convinced an entire nation that bacon and eggs were the only healthy way to start the day, a tradition invented overnight, out of nothing but a survey and a headline. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a dictator. He was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he weaponized the human subconscious to sell products, wars, and ideas at a scale no government had ever managed. His name was Edward Bernays, and this is how one man learned to control the desires of millions without a single person realizing they'd been told what to want. To understand how deep this manipulation went, you have to understand where it started, in a family tree that reads like a psychological weapon waiting to be built. Edward Bernays was born in Vienna in 1891 into the Freud family twice over. His mother was Sigmund Freud's sister, and his father was the brother of Freud's wife. Psychoanalysis wasn't just a theory he read about. It was the family business. While most of America still believed people made decisions through logic and reason, Bernays had grown up around the idea that human behavior is actually driven by hidden, irrational forces, fears, insecurities, and desires buried below conscious awareness. And Bernays asked a question no one in business had seriously asked before. If you could reach that subconscious layer directly, could you make millions of people want something they never wanted before? He didn't just answer that question. He spent the next 50 years proving it, and it started with cigarettes. In 1929, smoking in public was considered scandalous for women, a social taboo strong enough that most wouldn't dare light a cigarette on a city street. The American Tobacco Company wanted that taboo gone. They hired Bernays to make it disappear. Bernays didn't run an ad campaign. He consulted a psychoanalyst who suggested something darker and far more effective. Cigarettes could be repositioned as symbols of male power, meaning if women held them, they'd be symbolically holding power. Society had denied them. So during New York's 1929 Easter Parade, Bernays quietly arranged for a group of fashionable young women to march down Fifth Avenue in front of the press and light cigarettes in public, together, on command. He didn't call them cigarettes for the cameras. He called them torches of freedom, reframing an act of smoking as an act of feminist rebellion, tied to the still recent memory of women's suffrage. Newspapers across the country ran the story the very next day. Almost overnight, women smoking in public went from scandalous to fashionable, and cigarette sales among women began climbing for the first time in American history. Nobody told those women what to think. Bernays simply built the emotional story and let their own desire for freedom do the rest of the work. Around the same period, a bacon producer came to Bernays with a much duller problem. Americans at the time mostly ate a light breakfast, juice, coffee, maybe toast. Bacon sales were flat. Bernays didn't run a bacon ad either. He wrote to his family physician and asked whether a heavier breakfast was healthier than a light one. The doctor agreed it likely was, so Bernays had that physician help him reach out to 5,000 other doctors across the country, asking them to confirm the same opinion, that a hearty breakfast was better for the average American's health. A large share agreed, and that response became the headline. 5,000 physicians recommend a bigger breakfast. Every major newspaper ran some version of that story. No newspaper mentioned bacon by name in most of those headlines. It didn't need to. Bacon and eggs were simply suggested as the example of a hearty breakfast, and America has eaten some version of that exact meal every morning since. By 1928, Bernays had already run campaigns like these for years, but that year, he did something almost no manipulator in history has ever done. He wrote it all down and published it. The book was called simply Propaganda, and its opening line is still shocking to read today. It openly states that the deliberate, intelligent manipulation of the public's habits and opinions is a central, necessary feature of a democratic society. This wasn't a confession written in guilt. It was a blueprint, written with pride, a manual explaining exactly how to reach what he called the public's subconscious herd instinct and steer it toward a chosen outcome, all while the public believed the decision was entirely their own. He called the people who did this work engineers of consent, professionals who quietly shaped public opinion the same way an actual engineer shapes steel and concrete. Governments took notice immediately. Bernays' techniques were later studied and used far beyond advertising, including by U.S. wartime information campaigns, and, disturbingly, cited approvingly by propagandists in Nazi Germany, a connection that horrified Bernays himself when he learned of it. Bernays died in 1995, but almost every technique in his playbook is still running today. You've just never seen the name behind it. Every time a brand pays a doctor, scientist, or expert to publicly endorse a product instead of advertising it directly, that's the bacon and eggs playbook, updated. Every time a product is marketed less as an object and more as an identity, buy this, become this kind of person, that's the Torches of Freedom playbook, running in a different decade. Even modern social media feeds are, in part, engineered consent, quietly shaping what feels normal, desirable, and true, at a scale Bernays could only have dreamed of in 1928. Here's the part that should actually unsettle you. Bernays never hid any of this. He published the blueprint. He gave it a title. He put his name on the cover. And nearly 100 years later, most people have still never heard of him, because the most effective propaganda was never about hiding the method. It was about making sure nobody ever thought to ask who was holding the strings. If this kind of story pulls you in, subscribe, because history is full of people like Bernays, and most of them you've never heard of either.